Hey gang, today I wanted to go through a little list of things that you want to have before you start painting miniatures. Number 1. A lamp. Lighting is a necessity for painting. I just have one from Amazon. It has 2 panels, brightness settings, warmth settings. You don't really need a fancy expensive one. If you do want to have a fancy expensive one, then people generally recommend the lucent lamp. It looks really nice, it looks very useful, and to be honest, I kind of want one of these, but I'm happy with my little Amazon one. Basically, as long as you can see what you're painting, then it's good. I do also sometimes break out the very fashionable headlamp when I'm really struggling. I don't have one with a magnifying glass because it kind of throws off my depth perception, which is already kind of bad. But if you do need one, they do make ring lights with a magnifying glass in the center, so you can see better without having the lighting obstructing as well. Number 2. Containers and holders. So I've technically put 3 things in here, but they're all kind of related, so I chucked them all together. If you're in the UK, at Tesco's, they have 20 plastic shot glasses for £1. These are very useful. If you turn them upside down, they perfectly fit a 32mm base, so if you don't have a model holder, this is great, and you can just fill it with blue tack or rocks to weigh it down a bit so it's easier to hold. I used to not tack these to my desk, but then I would knock them over all the time, so yeah. And they're also very useful if you ever drink your paint water. I've genuinely never drank paint water, but I think it's just because I use things like this for water instead of mugs or cup-shaped water pots. They're also super useful for mixing pigments into resin, thinning paint for airbrushes, and mixing random dirt and rocks with PVA glue to make basing paste, etc. These are just overall very, very useful, and I would recommend you get these. The second receptacle is if you want to upgrade your water pot to something a bit less prone to knocking over. I use these pop-up water pots from GameMV. I have the old one and the new one. They're a little bit grubby, but they do clean really easily because they are mainly silicone, and I tend to keep them fully unpopped and just fill the middle bit. I don't like having to lift my hand up to dip a brush in water quickly, so it's just much more efficient for me to have it super shallow. But it does have the option to be full cup sized if you prefer that. The team at GameMV are also super lovely and supported my painting competition last year with some of these pots. I do have an affiliate link to their shop as well. It is in the description. They also have the lucent lamps that I mentioned in number 1. The last container is also kind of subdivided itself into 2, depending how you feel. For a paint palette, because of the climate where I live is essentially a swamp, the majority of the time it's too humid, and using a wet palette just leaves me with unusably thin paint most of the time. So go to Home Bargains or Amazon and get a couple of these silicone fidget toys. They're generally like £1 each, and once the paint is dry in them, you just kind of pop it out and the paint says "see ya" and flies out across the room. If you do find it a bit of a mess, I do that thing from school where you just cover it in PVA and then you just peel it off and get this little satisfying bubble thing of skin. If you live somewhere less humid than the UK, then I still recommend one of these for metallic paint, and if you prefer to manually control the thinness of your paint. If you live somewhere more dry, then do get a wet palette. They are useful. I have this army painter one. Just put a couple of copper pennies or some copper tape or some copper wire under the sponge, and this will more or less stop mold and bacteria from growing in it, especially if you leave it wet and in the sun over summer, so it kind of saunas itself. That's not ideal, and you can grow mushrooms that way. Wet palettes work through osmosis, which is water moving through a barrier, which is the paper, to balance itself between the sponge and the paint. So if your air is dry and is actively sucking the paint dry, then this will counteract that from underneath. If your air is humid and you have a very wet sponge, then the water will slowly thin your paint into watery puddles, which isn't super useful, at least to me. I do get asked a lot how much water I put in my wet palette. The answer is pretty much just enough so the sponge is fully saturated, and then I put a little extra just so I can see the water around the edge of the sponge but not over the top, and then as it evaporates I will refill it when it's needed. You don't want water puddling on top or coming over the edge of the sponge, and you definitely don't want water on top of your paper, because then you will just have water paint once again. Number 3. Food and water. Sounds dumb, but if you're dehydrated, low blood sugar, iron deficient, low on protein, literally anything, you will paint worse. Things like this affect your hand steadiness, like shaky hands, your vision, and your muscle control. For example, if you watch me paint on stream, it's very obvious quite fast if I've forgotten to eat that day or have water because my hands will be so shaky, I will be struggling and eventually have to go and get a snack. To tack onto this, if you do have problems with hand steadiness, I will do a video on this if people are interested, but you may be holding your brush wrong, which is an easy fix with practice, and have a look into things like bouldering and rock climbing, or at least the exercises for those sports, as it will train your hands to get thick and muscly to better steady your hand without straining. There are some other things, but that can be a separate video. Let me know if that would be useful. Also, on the waterfront, I do find that some paint brands don't work super well with my hard water. They go kind of grainy and chalky, probably because my water has chalk in it, but I'm not going to do anything to fix that. I'm not the water supply company. So I tend to stick with Citadel and Army Painter paints, which seem to be okay on the most part. If you don't have hard water or are willing to make or buy distilled water, then you don't really need to worry about this. I don't really worry about it, but that's just because I've kind of found the paints that work for me. Number 4. Sharp things are your friend, except when they're not. So to get minis off sprues, you want to go to your local building merchants, hardware store, tradie shop, and get yourself a nice pair of side cutters. I recommend the age-old advice of not getting the cheapest ones, but the second or third cheapest ones. If you get these from a Sparky's, then they'll spot you around £3 to £5, and if you get these from a hobby store, you'll be out £10 to £15. Same thing for scalpels. You can get a cheapo scalpel on Amazon or wherever, like £3, or you can get a hobby brand one for £10 to £20. You don't need a fancy mold line remover, just use the blunt side of your scalpel. I do have a GW scalpel, but it was a gift, and I'm really scroungy with the blades, so the original knife that came with the pack of blades will last me until I die, essentially. I'm 3 years in and only just on blade 2, and that was just because I used it to cut up food and snacks, and it went rusty and was a bit serrated from other things I shouldn't have used it on, which kind of messed up the blade. Last thing, number 5. White tack. So this is essentially blue tack without the blue dye. I much prefer this to blue tack. I find blue tack gets kind of weird when it gets old, I assume from the blue dye or whatever it is inside of it, but my white tack will just stay usable at all times, and you can see a lot better when it gets dirty and needs a bit of a wash. I use this for all of my sticky needs. I would recommend this. I would also recommend if you're looking toward doing or getting better at more intensive model painting with subassembly and airbrush and OSL and stuff, to get some liquid latex. It smells really bad. Like, it's actually disgusting to smell. Try not to breathe. But put it on painted bits you don't want to make a mess of, or you don't want to get paint on, like if you're priming and you can't stick that bit together with blue tack because it's just too awkward. Put this on the bits that need the glue, so then you don't have to scrape off the primer later. I will say, try and remember where you put it. I have done commissions where I'm like, oh, I'll just glue these 2 bits together, and then realize that I've just glued 2 pieces of liquid silicone that have been painted over together. So then I have to re-glue it because it is not glued. Also, super glue sucks, so if you can use plastic glue for as much as possible, that's all the better. So yeah, these are all the things I started with and wish I started with, and things that I still use. They're all pretty much buy it for life type of things, which is always nice. Let me know if I've missed anything, or you think something else is super important and should be on this list. Let me know if you want a video on things to help with hand steadiness as well. If you like this, subscribe for more. Links and stuff in the description below, and bye-bye.